Hey there, folks. This is Jay Frost speaking to you from the helm of the Philanthropy Mastermind series, brought to you by the fine folks at DonorSearch. And we won't be talking about them much today unless, of course, our guest chooses to say something about them. But I hope that you will take a look at their website later today for information about, of course, all they do with philanthropy, and especially about understanding our donors and our leaders. You can learn all about them at DonorSearch.net. And while you are there, you can take a look for all the Philanthropy Masterminds content that we've been producing and making available to you for the past several years. That's all under the Resources tab, as well as on a few new social media channels that I'm sure you'll enjoy. So I hope you'll take a look at those. Take a look at all the content on the DonorSearch site and even at the DonorSearch YouTube channel. Lots of great stuff there, including an interview with our guest today, who is, of course, Randall Hallett, who's going to be appearing before your eyes just momentarily. I'll have the pleasure of introducing him to you, but I want to just give you a tip first, which is that you can learn a lot more about Randall and his life, and it's a fascinating one, over at the DonorSearch Philanthropy Masterminds podcast, which is something you can get wherever you get your podcasts. That episode came out fairly recently, and I'm sure you'll enjoy it. And if you recognize his booming voice, that's because he's a man who, in addition to having decades in the field of fundraising as a practitioner and leader and a consultant in practice, leading institutions to greater success, especially in the C-suite of both fundraising and leadership, that he's also been a broadcaster. So lots of interesting things about this man and his life, and especially what he's bringing to us with this book right here in my hands, Vibrant Vulnerability. The subtitle is Mastering Philanthropy for Today and Tomorrow's Healthcare CEOs. We're going to be talking about that today in detail, but we want to have that conversation with you. So I'm going to hope that you'll just maybe let us know a couple of things in the chat as we begin today. And one of those is maybe where you're dialing in from. I know it's not dialing, but anyway, where you're tuning in to this conversation from, the name of the institution, and if you wouldn't mind, maybe what you do. So, oh, hey, thank you, Wayne. Oh, Wayne. Great to see you from Tampa. And I know that you, Wayne, are in a leadership role, especially devoted in this part of your work and life of course, at Shriners and in Planned Giving, among other things. So if we can know about what you do, maybe if you're in that kind of role of CEO, CDO, what have you, that'll help Randall a lot as we're thinking about the conversation today. And oh man, this is great. Thank you so much for answering the questions. So we've got Derek there from New Jersey Health, and Allison, Crohn's and Colitis, Mary at Unity Point Health, Laura right there at Mercy Health, Dartmouth Health. Wow, I was just talking about Dartmouth Health with someone in the podcast, an interviewee who was one of the CNN heroes. So we'll have to let you know about that. And let me see who else here. Wow, Bridget. And practice leader for healthcare, nonprofits, and social impact. That must be a really interesting job description and a lot of responsibility. Giselle, New Haven, executive director of Project Access. And good to see you there, New Haven, an old hometown of mine. And let's see, senior director, that's John, of Principal Major Gifts at Spalding, which is another impressive institution. Love this breadth of the people in the room today. Thank you so much for hanging out. And I hope you'll keep those fingers warm, because we definitely want you to be a part of the conversation. I do not want to monopolize it beyond the introductions. You're going to hear a lot more from Randall than from me, but I also know he would like to hear from you. So please keep that chat going. Thank you, Brian. It's good to see you here from Mercy. A great room for a great topic, which is challenging because Randall, I guess the big question is, what's the problem here? What problem are you trying to solve? Why write this book?
Well, Jay, first, thank you. I can't tell you how much I appreciate being here. Number two, yes, I did do broadcasting, but the important thing to remember is that it was radio, because this is a face you want on radio, not on television. That's probably the most important thing. I think the last decade, as I have kind of ventured more into consulting, coming out of the practice, of philanthropy was a growing frustration. And actually, mentally, I kind of wrote the book just before COVID. I was beginning to speak to CEOs more and more about their engagement and what we need. And then COVID kind of upset it all. And I decided during the pandemic to write the book. And it's really based on kind of two premises. The first is my own experience, is that when we needed immense health care for our son a little more than a decade ago, I call him my $2 million kid because that's been the medical bills. We had everything at our fingertips here in Omaha, Nebraska. And what I learned was, as I kind of began to pay attention more, and by the way, at the time I was the head of philanthropy at the Nebraska Medical Center, so I'm an insider, is access is everything. And what we're watching is access diminish. And at the same time, part of the reason that access is diminishing is because the finances of healthcare. And I was so fortunate to have a mentor and a boss in Glenn Fosdick at Nebraska Medicine, in that he let me and asked me and demanded of me to sit at that executive table to be a contributing member of the vision of where he wanted to take us. And so I had to learn. And what I figured out was, and I like finance, is that the systemic cataclysmic changes in the last 5 to 7 years in healthcare in general, but also most importantly in the finances, the way we get revenue and expenses out of the clinical enterprises, is in this drastic change. And there's a parallelization where our clinical leaders they're not used to this. And we can get into lots of details around it. But I wrote the book because more and more of my conversations with chief development officers, with gift officers, with CEOs, when I had that opportunity, was this absolute misalignment of understanding about what goes on, really, that they are the catalyst for why philanthropy executes at its highest level. And although the chief development officer, chief philanthropy officer is doing so much of the legwork, the CEO sets strategy. The CEO spends the money. The CEO is the face of the organization and the community. And then you juxtapose to that what's going on in universities and things of that nature. I just don't think they're ready for what's coming. And in the end, I believe that in somewhere between 5 to 10 years, healthcare CEOs will look more like university presidents than they will 5 years ago as a CEO in a hospital. Some are making that change, most aren't, and they're not prepared.
And is that a good thing?
I think it is, because I think that I see so much talent in the C-suite with chief operating officers and chief financial officers and service line directors. There's a lot of people worried about quality, patient satisfaction, finances. But at the end of the day, universities figured this out. That's why they're raising 7 times more money than hospitals. Because when you hire a university president, they don't care if they can teach chemistry. In fact, I'll take a couple of examples. The University of Florida just hired a new university president. They hired a United States Senator in Ben Sasse. Now, he's from Nebraska, so I have a little inside knowledge. But you look at university hires from in Texas with Rex Tillerson or countless other ones, they're not hiring professors. North Carolina just went through this in the last 2 weeks, where their university president goes to Michigan State and the university system hires more of a non-faculty member to become the interim chancellor. And the faculty went crazy saying, but he's not a faculty member. And the university is saying, but we don't want him teaching chemistry or ethics. We want him raising money. That's where hospitals are going to go, because they need the money. Our healthcare demands of it in terms of how we care for our communities.
One of the many things in the book that you do is you kind of go through this inventory, which I think you're going to share with us later, about what makes a good CDO. But if you don't mind, before we get there, since not everybody in this room is a CEO, what do you think makes a good CEO?
Well, that's the title of the book, is vulnerability. Right. There's this, and I write about this in terms of power in chapter, I got to think about it, 3. We think about CEOs in healthcare more so than anywhere else. And a part of it is kind of the medical God complex, that they're supposed to be omnipotent. They have to have all the answers. And I was so blessed to have a dad who owned his own company. And the thing that I learned from him, probably as much as anything is that it was the people that he surrounded himself with that knew more than him that he embraced to make the company go where it was supposed to. So that philosophy, I look into healthcare and I'm like, no CEO is supposed to know everything. The best leaders, and if you're looking for a leadership book, my favorite book on leadership is Team of Rivals by Doris Kearns Goodwin, where Abraham Lincoln surrounded himself with people who were smarter than he was, who didn't like him, to guide the country through the worst time in our 225, 230-year history. The same is true in CEOs, and that's why I wrote the book, Vulnerability. I called it that, at least. The best CEOs I work with, and in particular one that mentored me in Glenn Fosdick, they were vulnerable. I don't know that much about that. Who can we get into the room to help solve that problem? Instead of, I know everything, and we need to do what I say. And we need more vulnerability in leadership right now in healthcare than ever, because the challenges are huge.
So for those who haven't read the book, because it's still new. When did this come out? I'm trying to remember the pub date.
Oh, late fall, very late fall, early winter.
So I know it should be obvious, but just if you don't mind, define vulnerability in that context. What does that look like? What are the characteristics of it, and how do they then manifest themselves in terms of the CEO's role when it comes to resource development?
That's a great question. I'll actually do both. Vibrant is meaning energetic. There's energy in what you do. Vulnerability is the willingness to view oneself as not being omnipotent and being able to admit that and then turn it into a leadership quality, if done correctly, that allows you to bring in people that can help you and the organization meet its mission. For a CEO, I mean, if you think about the normal reporting governance structure, there's a chief marketing officer, chief medical officer, a chief operating officer, finance officer, philanthropy officer, maybe HR. Now we've got chief strategy officers, chief information officers. There's no way. And in the book, I interview Mark Harrison, the former CEO at Intermountain, who's, kind of a legendary person in the idea of healthcare leadership. He'll tell you, I didn't know all of those things. I got people around me that would help me. The problem is people think philanthropy is easy. And this is a science. This is a profession. And so I want to help CEOs say the answers are in front of you if you're just vulnerable enough, open enough to allow a really good partner in the CDO to help you get to where you need to be and where the organization can be to increase revenue to meet the needs of healthcare in a community.
When you read through the book, you do give a whole bunch of examples of things like the simplest one for me to remember is related to open questions, things of that nature. Mm-hmm. And that's something that plays very well, I think, in terms of resource development. I mean, at any level, that asking questions in that way is great. You learn a lot and you build trust. But there's also something about that vibrancy that you're talking about that's important, right? That it's more than just asking a question and sitting back. It's also being an engaged listener. And I believe you talk about that as well, but I don't remember.
Yes, chapter 7 about this concept of that a lot of CEOs do one of, they may actually do both. And the most important thing, which I get to in chapters 8 and 9, is about integrating the CDO into the planning process, which we can talk about later if you want. But I think in terms of listening, is that my favorite internal philanthropy phrase is, if you ask somebody for money, you'll get advice. If you ask them for advice, you'll get money. And too often CEOs fall into one of two categories. They literally bring philanthropy in after decisions are made and things have already been purchased or in the purchasing process. And those of us who've done this long enough, like, how do I go out and talk about something we've already bought? Or they walk into a room and they say, I know the answer to all the plans. And you're with people who have, if the right people are in the room, millions or billions of dollars who've been successful. The one thing that's consistent about all of them is they like to give their opinions. And sometimes, even if you have all the answers, only taking in 40 or 50% of the answer and allowing someone else to come in with you in the process allows for community engagement. And The university medical center chancellor, Dr. Hal Moore, when I was there, was a genius at this. He had a kitchen cabinet, about 7 or 8 people. They came in every month to have a cup of coffee. And at the end of the day, they told him more about what they thought the community needed for healthcare that he could then morph into what he believed was the best for the university and for the community that brought the two together. That model of communication is hard if you don't have vulnerability, because you have to look at people that are outside of healthcare who don't have your experience, and you have to look at them and say, tell me what's going on from your perspective and what you think we need to do to be more effective.
Randall, just a quick question for you, and then
Mhm.
one for the people with us today. Is that piece, the practical piece of having a kitchen cabinet, for example, or a group of advisors, is that something that also chief development officers can take advantage of as well as the CEOs?
If you're smart, some of them are the same people, because then you'll find out what they're talking about in the room that you weren't in. Yes. I mean, some of the most valuable information I received was when I would have a cup of coffee in a small group or individually with some of the same people that were in that room. How did it go? Well, we talked about this, this, and this. That gave me information about kind of where the community's at, so that I could bring this back into the operational piece of how do we strategically fit this into a better process.
So now I'd like to throw that out to the group for those who are willing to answer it, and I can anonymize your responses here, or you can make it from anonymous, I believe. I'm curious to know if folks in the audience have a kitchen cabinet for their chief executive officer or for the chief development officer.
Outside of a board.
Right, outside the board. Thank you. Yes, because this is important. Whether or not if there's a mechanism for learning from these people on a somewhat regular basis, and then letting those learnings become a part of the fabric of what you do, and maybe also then reporting back, so these folks know that you are paying attention. That kind of active listening, except now across the kitchen cabinet. I'm not seeing any response to that yet, but if you do have thoughts, and I would welcome that. That's it may be a hard one,
Jay, most don't, because with the clients I deal with worldwide, it's a question I ask: who, as a CEO, do you get information from that's not formalized? It's not a board, it's not an employed position, it's not a senior executive team member. It's informal. It's a cup of coffee in a quiet place that's confidential,
Okay.
that you can say, I'm having these issues. Is this something the community could embrace? Or the community coming in and saying, this is an enormous problem. And just give you an example. I believe fully that you can't have a great community unless you have 3 aspects: great infrastructure, roads, police, fire, safety, basic things. Education, which is hope. And that doesn't mean a 4-year institution. That means could be a great, in a very small community, a great public school system, that there's hope for those kids to go into the future. And the third is healthcare. And if you don't have healthcare, you cannot attract business, you cannot attract employment, you cannot grow as a community, because as a growing population of people is occurring, they're making decisions on where they live, on where they can get healthcare. So that is the kind of communication that can and should occur as CEO. But tying that back into philanthropy, if people want something and it fits what the community needs or wants, and it has impact, that's where philanthropy is at its best. And what I find is sometimes we get that back in terms of from the community to maybe into the executive suite, but philanthropy is not brought into it. And we walk into crazy conversations like, well, we've already decided to spend $10 million on this particular endeavor. And you're like, if I'd have known that 6 months ago, I think I could have found you multiple millions of dollars. So it's a circle. It can't,
Right.
the minute you break it is the minute it doesn't work.
Right, internally or externally, if people think everything's de facto. And I want to thank the folks who did answer this, and saying, for example, because I want to honor the anonymity piece, that one has a senior advancement leadership team, or SALT. I like acronyms that make sense, and then you can kind of publicize we are doing this as a way of engaging with people. And another who says we have several philanthropic councils, or philanthropy councils, excuse me, in regions that serve a similar function. So this is um, this is important. And as you said, I don't know how common it is, maybe in part because when you set up something that's a new function or an external function, it's one more thing to manage, and probably people are feeling pretty put upon right now. And a lot of this, in fact, you can address, and I know you have some slides in the margins for business. So I don't know where you'd like to take that, but I would love for you to share some of this content, and maybe it'll lead up to this issue of margins. And in fact, as we get into that, I want to just ask the folks here in the room also, if you have a sense of what your margin is. And the reason I'm asking this, and if you don't answer it, don't want to answer it, that's okay. But I think for the field as a whole, for healthcare, is it now like it was 1.8, now it's down to 1.4? I can't remember. It was
You're
some
talking about clinical data?
for hospitals,
Yes.
for the operating margins.
It's the latest Kaufman Hall numbers I saw is it's finally positive industry wide, but we're talking at or less than 1%.
Which is a very dangerous margin for operating anything, any kind of business or nonprofit.
You won't make it. Won't make
any
it
increase in cost, any and loss of revenue, and then you're really in trouble.
So Jay, I pulled a couple because the book has graphs and charts in it, and I pulled a couple just to connect the conversation. And let me share something with you and with everyone. So this is in the very first part of the book.
Yeah.
Is this idea of why philanthropy is so efficient. And I tend to use something like this with a lot of executive team members to explain. And the green on the left is increased revenue for the organization anywhere. So if you want to make 10 million more dollars, you need to do something. The blue is done in healthcare or in clinical operations. And if you look at, and I assume a 1 to 3% margin, you said margins. If the hospital has a 1 to 3% margin, if you want to increase revenue by $10 million, you're going to have to invest somewhere between $300 and $1 billion to get an extra 10. And it's just math, 1% of 10 million. And then divide it and you come up with the amount you need to input. And it's going to take a minimum of 3 to 5 years. What we know is that we are so much more efficient and quick. To get to $10 million, we can do it in $3 to $4 million in terms of cost. We can do it in a year or two if done correctly. And so some of this metrics is a way of helping people understand the investment. And that's what it is. We are not an expense. But CEOs and particularly CFOs in Chapter 8, I go into the difference in psychology, into the difference of perspective from a CDO, Chief Development Officer, to a CFO, a Chief Financial Officer. We are not an expense. We are an investment. And the more we have that conversation, the more likely we are, particularly as dollars get tighter, to be more accepted into the conversation. And I'll give you an example. I was on site with a client in the last 10 days, and it's a new client, and they have a CEO who gets it. She is outstanding. And she asked me to come into her executive team, plus some other kind of next level management administration. About 20 people in the room, and I showed this slide and a couple of others. It was just 15 minutes. And she stood up and she looked at this team and she says, "Do you understand what he just told us?" And I didn't know where she was going. And I just kind of thought, I'm just going to step back because I don't have any clue where we're headed here. And no one said anything. She goes, "I'm going to ask again." No one answered. She says, "I'm going to tell you what it means. Our foundation is the cheapest way and the fastest way to get money into the organization and into the hands of people who need it to make a difference in the lives of the people that we're being charged with for care. In this case, it's kids. And we talk about not having any money. We need everybody to get on board. And that may mean you don't like exactly what this means. We're going to do it ethically. We're going to do it legally. We're going to do it within compliance. But we are going to do it because of this." And I thought, if I could just clone her, they can keep the original and I'll take her to a few places. I think it could make a difference because that's the difference what a CEO engagement looks like. Because now there's no question as to where they're headed.
There's something in the book, it's just an analogy at the very beginning about the 5 monkeys experiment.
My favorite story.
Can you share that?
Sure, it's in the prologue. So there's an old adage about five monkeys. They're in a cage, and it's an experiment done at a university. And they're the instructors or the people running the experiment put a ladder in the cage with the five monkeys and a banana on a shelf. And the monkeys see the banana and they run it, start going up the ladder. And the those running the experiment start spraying cold water heavily on the monkeys. And every time they get off the ladder, they stop. And the monkeys learn after a second that, hey, I don't need the banana that bad because I don't like the water that much. But the real experiment is in because once they've come to that kind of control that they're not going to go get the banana, it just sits up there. The those running the experiment take one of the monkeys out and put a new monkey in. The new monkey sees the banana, not knowing anything, heads up the ladder. Now they don't have to spray water. The other four monkeys pull the monkey down, saying, I don't want to get sprayed. Well, then they start exchanging after a new kind of with each new monkey, a new level of understanding is occurring where nobody's going up the ladder. At a certain point after exchanging monkeys, there's five new monkeys who've never been squirted with anything. And if you could get into the head of the monkeys, you would ask the question, why aren't you going to get the banana? And the answer is because none of them were squirted. That's the way we've always done it. And that's where healthcare is right now. This is the way we've always done it. Philanthropy siloed, it's over there. It's a nice bonus when we're running 11, 12, 13% margins from the clinical enterprise. And what I want and the book is helpful, I think, for philanthropy, but I didn't write it for philanthropy or those people in the fundraising part. I wrote it to CEOs for CEOs. It's not nice. It's like you're screwing this up, but there's a solution, a series of them, small ones that aren't that hard. And it's to get out of, we got to quit doing what we keep doing because that's the way we've always done it, because it's not going to work.
Well, no, the situation has changed. Also, I mean that banana is what we want. We want the banana, and but we're still not climbing the ladder, and we don't know why. But as you said, there are some who are willing to move beyond that. When it comes to the chief development officers, then you have this different kind of selection of criteria about what makes them successful. Can you share that?
Sure, I pulled that out because there's a lot of it, but and I'll share a screen. I think there are some certain things that are really important when we talk about great CDOs, and I'm so fortunate to work with clients that this is who they are. And there's a list on your screen. I'm not going to go through it, but there's one thing I'll maybe draw your attention to. I think it's critically important they understand about asking, but you don't see it on the list here. What we need is people who can think longitudinally, who are understanding of the key idea of relationship building. And I just don't mean with donors, but I mean inside the organization for trust, that they are a master negotiator and they don't take things personally. There's kind of a sense of depth about them. Those are the people that are engaging into the clinical enterprise and clinical leadership and earning, which is our responsibility, trust, to challenge the status quo, the vulnerability we need on the other side of the equation. Yes, I think it's great if you can ask for money. I love it. But leadership is more than just the idea of being able to ask. And the book is full of stories of my life. I mean, it's all I know. But it talks about me getting my job and a 35-year-old person becoming the chief development officer in academic medical center, looking at who would become one of my two most important mentors, literally asking him, why in the world are you talking to me? I'm 35. You got to find better people than me. And he's like, and he didn't say it this way, but he was saying, I'm vulnerable enough. I want to mess this up because we're not doing it right. And I know I've got to make a change. Mm-hmm. My fundraising skills weren't the reason I think that we had some success. Really, my team was the reason we had success. But at the end of the day, it was because there were a lot of other factors that I needed to use to figure out how we were going to leverage philanthropy to be more effective. And that's, yes, go ask for money, critical. But if you want to build, it takes leadership skills that are like these. And you can be a great solicitor, but if you don't have these skills, you're not going to build a culture and change an organization that can use philanthropy to its fullest.
When people are making hires, though, for the chief development officer or for the staff, are they looking at a list or thinking about something like this, or are they thinking about the person who can sell?
No, it's the same thing I'm telling clients, a little bit different job description, but about major gift officers. We and HR doesn't, this is another area where we don't have a great alignment. That we need a gift officer, and they put together a job description. We may review it, we may even lead them to it. And then they start the process, and the only thing they're concerned about is years of experience. And what I'm coming to understand more and more is, much like a chief development officer, these other skills are more important. It doesn't mean you hire someone who's never asked for money. But in a major gift officer, I talk about the idea of, you're looking for someone with a fire in the belly, that they're going to get up, show up, and they're going to make phone calls. They're going to go see people. They know that they got to get the job done, that there's a sense of resiliency in them, which you can't find in a job description or in a resume. Resiliency, that they don't take it personally when you make that phone call and someone says, hey, I don't want to talk to you about what's going on at your organization. I don't care. It isn't about us. It's about them. And having that sense of resiliency, like a water off a duck's back, let it go. And then the third thing is passion. Do they believe in the mission? Or at least, why are they there? You look at a resume, it's really hard to discern fire in the belly, resiliency, and passion. But those are the three things we should look for. And the same thing is true of a chief development officer. Yes, you should ask for an understanding of money, but if you don't have all these other skills, you're not going to build credibility, because most people don't understand what we do in philanthropy. And that's why the book is important, is to challenge that status quo and give them something else to think about in the way in which we work.
And again, I know that you had some things that you can share, and one really defines the real risk right now. I think it's that second slide or something with the bullets, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, so I think it's also important, if we're going to build trust, our job is to build trust in this process, is to understand the absolute calamity and pressure that CEOs are under and what it's meaning. And what we're seeing is this unbelievable change. Tenure of CEOs, and this comes from a number of sources, but Becker's does a great job of providing a lot of this data, is their tenure is diminishing absolutely precipitously, because the job isn't what it was. I would also say, and I'll get into this, maybe I'll transition to this here in a second, is that new CEOs are coming into this from, a lot of them from finance, from operations, and from information. And so they're not built in the external view that we have. And so that relationship becomes even more important. The other thing is that we're seeing an immense amount of change in the team that they surround themselves with. That's kind of the third bullet. 87% of CMOs are replaced within 2 months of a CEO. I mean, that is unbelievable, which means there wasn't a relationship or trust or whatever. Well, that's also then rolling down into COOs, CFOs. The difference between a CFO and a lot of other positions is they live by that number, by the balance sheet, by the income statement. A new CFO is going to change the income statement. The income statement is what the income statement is. So there's a little more stability there. I think the other thing is that you can see at the bottom, boards are now getting desperate in figuring out where they got to find leadership. And all of a sudden, from venture capitalists, which is more on the private for-profit side of healthcare, from market and sales, they're really struggling. And the reason why is because if we think about the university model as a comparison, and I'll pull this up. If we think about the university model, then I posited this at the beginning, that in 5 years, I think the CEO's position is going to look more like a university president than is a hospital president or CEO today. If you think about the model that a university president goes through, and I write about this in the book from a historical perspective, in the late 1980s and 1990s, public universities began to run out of money. States were pulling back dollars. So there wasn't the resources that they were used to. That's why, in part, tuition has increased so much, amongst many other things. Well, universities figured this out. It took them about 5 seconds, and they just changed. They don't hire the chemistry professor. But think about the career development of a university chancellor. If they came through the university ranks, if they were, which is on the kind of the left side, early in their career when they were a professor or in that first department chair leadership position, there was philanthropy. May not have been a lot, but there was some. And as you look down the chart, by the time they become a dean, they're talking 20, 30, 40% of their time is spent in philanthropy into the role as the university chancellor, where if we go, I'm going to go forward a slide and come back. There are now studies that show us how much time a university chancellor is spending and president in philanthropic activities and engagement. Now we're measuring it in days. How many days are they out on the road visiting donors? How many nights a week are they entertaining someone or a small group in some way, shape, or form? How many, what's not in here, how many meetings per week are they having with the vice chancellor for advancement? And it's not one. If we go back a slide, just, and I'll
Randall,
Jay.
as you're describing that, I just want to invite folks here in the room, if you want to share what you think is the number of days or appointments, whichever measure you think is most apt or comes to mind, that your CEO is out talking with people with philanthropy in mind. We would love to see that, to do that comparison to higher ed. Sorry, Randall, please go ahead.
And I would also advocate, Jay, if they want to put it in there, if you're a chief development officer in healthcare, do you actually physically report to the CEO? Oh, yeah. Because a university president would never have a university advancement leader reporting to somebody else. And yet too many times, and I'm not going to use names, but I'm watching the demotion of these positions. Like, well, now I report to the chief operating officer. I'm like, you've just signaled to the entire organization philanthropy isn't important. Just to finish, and I apologize, bounce all over the place, Jay, my apologies. On the right is when philanthropy tends to come in from a healthcare perspective. And you can see, not discussed, not discussed, not discussed, not discussed. And this is why I literally mailed a copy of my book to 200 for free. I paid for the postage to professors in healthcare leadership programs, master's programs. I said, you're not teaching this. And I got this because we had interns in these programs when I was at the Nebraska Medical Center. And I'd say, are you being taught anything about philanthropy? They'd go, I've never heard of philanthropy. So it's not in their education. It's not in the first, 2/3 of their career. And all of a sudden they become a service line leader, and maybe somebody shows up and says, what do you need? And then it's into the C-suite, and they're like, wait a minute, it's part of, and then they become CEO, and here comes the chief development officer saying, I report to you, and you're the reason I'm going to be successful. And they go, I have no idea what you're talking about. And so we're setting ourselves up for failure just in terms of the connection and knowledge that our leaders have.
And Randall, may I add to that? Because we had the chance to talk with Alice Ayers, who's the president of AHP,
yes.
not too long ago, about a year ago, I guess. And she was talking about the doctors, and especially doctors, physicians, and how in medical school, if I'm remembering how she phrased it, that there's no real education about what I've been talking about vulnerability, because of course they have to provide this level of care, and that means they have to have some degree, or it is believed that they have to have some degree of kind of emotional distance in order to be objective and provide that care. But then, of course, sometimes that can interfere both with the ability to provide the care with the patient by really bonding with them. But maybe more importantly is that it prevents the physician from having an experience that's also cathartic, because they deal with so much trauma themselves. And I'm wondering if that's, again, lack of vulnerability. So they don't only not learn about philanthropy, that isn't a word that they use in med school or nursing school, but they're definitely not learning about really vulnerability either, which is the way you're describing it, a fundamental of being successful in philanthropy.
I would say there's a financial component, there's an emotional component, there's a spiritual component. We know, I mean, those of us, again, we kind of looked at, there seems to be a lot of fundraising leaders on this call and share this with whomever, is that if people are philanthropic, if they have a stronger bent to philanthropy, and that doesn't mean money, that means love of mankind, love of humankind, helping others, they have better health. They deal with resiliency and burnout issues. They're more resilient. They deal with burnout issues better. There's two studies. They live longer, not because they're happier, because happier is an outside component of influence. Because they're joyful, which is internal, which is something I'm trying to teach my kids. Don't try to make people happy. Make yourself joyful. Because if you're joyful, that's something you can control by what you do, how you act, what you believe, how you treat others. All of these things are related to what we do. Yes, I totally agree with Alice Ayers and many others who are leaders within AHP, and hopefully people would think I'm helpful in that area because they're right. It's a part of the larger question. But here's the crazy thing. When I polled a number of master's level professors in good programs teaching healthcare administration, we have a self-fulfilling prophecy because they're not teaching any of this. And yet, and maybe I'm crazy, I'm called that every day at home, this is going to become the way in which healthcare is innovative, is through philanthropy. How do we get the types of services? And let me give you an example. And I talk about it in the book, this idea of healthcare deserts. We've got organizations that are literally shutting down either hospitals or departments or services in wide areas. I take a look at Upper New York as an example because it's a populous area. Hundreds of thousands of people. They don't have a birthing center within 60 miles. And they've closed hospitals because they didn't turn to the community. Hospitals can't be siloed. They are an intro back to the three things you got to have. And then you start looking at what's going on in those communities, and healthcare leaves. Now businesses are leaving, people are leaving, and all of a sudden you begin this process. And that's what I'm trying to get across to healthcare leaders. Like, we want to help you. We're not, and maybe natural transition to chapter 8. Meet your new best friend, the chief development officer. We are the only one in that senior executive room that doesn't wake up in the morning thinking we could be CEO of a hospital. But everybody else around that table thinks they could be a CEO. In fact, think they should be the CEO possibly in place of the person they're reporting to. It's kind of like the old game King of the Hill. You pull down people from the top. We just happen to stand on the outside most of the time going, yeah, I'm not playing.
Okay, so now you've talked about how you think that this is the direction healthcare is going. And it obviously it needs to do that because it needs the revenue, or else we don't have the care. And we certainly have these, care deserts right now all around the country. And it's not just in medicine, it's also dentistry, which is something else we've never talked about here. And it's really important as well.
And it's not just urban or rural.
Right.
We've got hospitals in Atlanta, Chicago, New York. These are, they're just shutting down because they're not able to execute on their financial planning.
So, but you see that this is almost inevitable that the hospitals are going to do this, but they aren't doing it now. So what is the transition? What's going to enable them to wake up in the morning and say, yes, I'm going to commit, and there's going to be a true partnership between the CEO and the CDO, and we're going to raise philanthropy? And maybe more importantly than that kind of broad question is, what can we in this room do to have that happen at our institutions now? To have the kind of meeting you had with that person who's more innovative last week? What steps do we need to take so we are the first on the line of innovation?
So the first thing I think that has to happen, which is maybe even more challenging to me, or disturbing, maybe is a better word, than the lack of understanding of philanthropy by our CEOs, is our boards. And I'm not talking about foundation boards. I'm talking about the governing board. There was a study about 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, out of Texas Tech, Russell James, who's a professor who teaches philanthropy, and if you don't know who he is, read his stuff. It's worth every second. But he did a study about what boards and nonprofits believe their job is. And most of them said, I wrote about it, did a podcast on it. I was like, whoa, whoa, no, 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 no. They think their job is to support and go along with the CEO. And I'm like, no, if you're a member of the nonprofit board, and let's take it hospital, you're representing the ownership, which is the community. So the first thing that's going to happen is that boards are going to get tired of the same answers of all we can do is cut, and we can't do this and we can't do this. And because they own the community and they are the owners of, or the representation of the ownership of the hospital as a nonprofit board, they're going to start saying these answers aren't good enough because we got to have this hospital because I live here. And by the way, as tenures of CEOs shrink, that also indicates that their level of engagement and ownership shrinks because they're not there long enough. So number one, culturally across the system, I think it's going to have to come from the board down because we're not teaching it. What can we do? Number one is our primary responsibility. I've got a client that I have immense admiration for, who keeps talking about our side of the equation. The book I've written is about what the CEOs can do. But our job is to engender trust. Our CEOs are confused. They don't know who to trust. They don't have a lot of time. So those skills that we talked about a few minutes ago, Jay, become more and more important. In that, you've got to find alliance with others. I start with the CFO. The most powerful person in the organization, other than the CEO, and sometimes even more than the CEO, is the CFO. And a way to do that is to explain what is the value of philanthropy from their perspective. And so I'm going to show 3 charts, and they're in the book, because I think they help a CFO understand, oh, this gets me to my goal. And if we help them get to their goal and it's philanthropy can be a part of it, it helps us win. So what I did was, and I give, again, Glenn Fosdick a lot of credit for making me sit through strategic planning meetings that were highly complicated. But what I did was I learned. This is just a very simplistic, and I apologize for all the numbers if you're not a numbers person or a nerdy chart person. This is a simple scenario where the hospital wants to increase something. And it could be they buying new equipment, it could be a new service. And on the top is all the revenue, and you negotiate different prices with the different commercial payers, Blue Cross, whomever. And underneath that is the number of procedures and how much you're getting paid for that service. The last 2 are Medicaid and Medicare. And you always have more of those that you're doing because it's a larger population base. And number 2, you get paid less. And you can just see that if you go across over a 6-year span, here's the revenue. On the bottom are the expenses for equipment, for building, for insurance, marketing, new personnel, and then you borrowed money to do it. You don't got any money. That's interest. And you can see the bottom arrow, the ROI for this particular project based on these just simplistic numbers. Make each one of them $1 million. So it's a $600 million revenue over 6 years with an expense of $464 million. It used to be that it was 3 to 4 years ROI when I was more of a practitioner. Now it's down to 2 years. The CFOs are saying we got to get our money back in 2 years because it's getting to be too expensive. This is done with no philanthropy. I'm going to move one slide. And you will see I added philanthropy, 7% of the total amount, $48 million, $47 million, let's say over 6 years, a year pre, and then you build out the program. The ROI, the return on when we start making a profit on this, moves more than a year. Just on $8 million a year. Or if you want to do it $100,000, $800,000 on a 50, on a whatever it would be, $64 million project. If I move philanthropy just a little bit more, where all of a sudden we're going to raise $100 million, $100,000, $1 million. It's all about zeros and decimals. We're 13% over 6 years. Now the ROI has moved to almost right at the 2-year mark, under a full 2 years. I've used this with a number of CFOs, and they look at me and their eyes just light up because this is the way they think. This is the only thing they think about. Somebody wants money for something new. How quickly can we start turning a profit on this particular endeavor? And if it's more than 2 or 3 years, the answer is it's never going to happen. Think about philanthropy moving more projects forward that can make a difference in your community and doing it faster. You take this in partnership hand in hand with the CFO to the CEO or strategic planning. Now we have alignment. And so how do we do this? We got to build trust, and we're going to have to find alliances with people. CMO about gratitude and what it means in terms of when patients express it and what it means philanthropically. CFO about the financial piece. You have to pick these off over time. And the last thing I'd say, Jay, before I take this down and let you appropriately take back over, the most important thing is it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take time, and it's going to take a lot of hand-holding. Yes, you can have a crazy guy like me who writes a book, and I've got 2 hospital associations that have reached out wanting me to talk about this with their CEOs. I've got 3 health systems, one of which has already started through it, taking their CEOs through kind of a course over a year. But it's going to take individuals to build trust internally. That's our role if you're on the fundraising side. If you're on the clinical side, it's, do you have vulnerability to look at it differently? And do I have enough, to steal from Maslow's self-actualization, to be okay with what I don't know and turn to people that I trust?
Thank you, Randall. As we think about this and as we get close to the end today, one of the things I did want to ask is if there's a way that people can take kind of the principal lessons to this and apply it to maybe even what they're doing right now. I mean, of course, on the soft end of that, but the most important fundamental is building those relationships. That's what you're just talking about with the CEO, with this chief financial officer, with these outside advisors in the community who can be a route to good ideas, but also to revenue. All those things are true. They're all really important lessons. When you just showed this chart and you said that really captured people's attention, just in the same way you said when you talked with a client a few days ago and you said, look, if you just do this, this is the result. Is there a way that, for example, the people in this room can go back to their current their P&L? I don't know if it's called a P&L here, excuse me, but some kind of statement like a profit and loss statement.
Profit and loss statement.
And then grab that thing and just start plugging in what would happen if. Yep. So they would know if we hire one more development officer, so many in their portfolio, and the gift is X, and the close rate is Y, that we're going to be more likely than not to have this % return. And so by year 2, we end up with this margin. I mean, these are the things that make it easy for me to understand. But how many of us are doing that? Can we do that? Can each of us go back and do that?
And I think I saw Ann Rasmussen from Peace Health here. Jay, that makes sense to us. It doesn't make sense to the C-suite. That's the crazy thing. And I've done this in a couple places. Crystal Miller at IU Health has done it, where I'm advocating, put it in their language. What you can do is take how much money you raise and the efficiency of that, so your cost raises $1.
Right.
What they're interested in is increasing the number of patients they have. And so, like, Peace Health is a good example. We were able to quickly calculate, because they gave us some financial information. It's pretty easy to do, and I'm glad to talk about it. But literally, for every $1 million they raised, how many new patients would they have to find that would equate to $1 million in profit or net revenue? And the number, I think, was like 728, if maybe I'm 1 or 2 off. And they're raising $50 million. So you start doing the math, I'm like, yeah, can you go find 35,000 new patients every year? And what I'm learning is that it's incumbent on us. What you described, I think, is great. That makes sense to us. It don't make any sense to them. Put it in terms that they can understand. All of a sudden, you start talking about attracting new patients. They're like, well, that I understand it. That's impossible. That's how great philanthropy is. And by the way, it's exponential, because if we invest in philanthropy, you can attract new patients because we have new physicians, new services, things that we don't normally do. And if they're in the right payer mixes, we'll generate more revenue. We're not only an investment in the bottom line, we're an investment in the future of bottom lines that is an exponential effect in years to come. So my counsel would be, for whatever it's worth, turn it a little bit and put it on them. It's no different than, I don't compare the gift officers to the nurses on 4 West. We're surgeons. They calculate when they bring in a new surgeon, how many surgeries can we do? Can they do, he or she? How does the cost of that surgery? What are the implications of capital to get them that surgery done? And how much can we charge? And there's an ROI to them. That's what you were talking about. That's one way, but I found it more and more effective to turn it a little bit differently so that they see that from the way in which they view their work every day.
Right. Which goes back to that point you were making about vulnerability. We have to be able to see things from another's perspective, or else we're never going to not just sell it, we're not going to be able to provide the care of the community. So Randall, thank you for all of this. And again, the book is Vibrant Vulnerability. It's out, and I should also acknowledge your co-author because he's been on a lot of books. It's Michael Ashley.
He's phenomenal. I can't thank him. Jay, I can't thank him enough. It's my book, my thoughts, if someone doesn't like it, it's certainly not his fault. But he was masterful at guiding me through the writing process, and I owe him so much.
Well, and for those who wonder, do I want another fundraising book? And this is more than that anyway. But the way it's written does amplify your own ample storytelling abilities. And you opened this session today by talking about having a sick child and the relationship between that experience and the place where you worked. There's even more of that in this book. And if for no other reason than people want to learn what happens when you need a hospital and your child stops breathing, pick up this book. If people want to hear more about your work, Randall, how can they learn about it? Where can they find your podcast?
Well, you're kind. Jack put up in the chat, the book's at Amazon. It's $12 and $5 if you do digital, by design. I don't make any money on this. It is, we've got to change what we're doing. You're very kind. I do a weekly podcast, 20 minutes. On one subject. What's the issue? What's kind of the bigger challenge, and what are the tactical solutions? I just did one which came out Tuesday, I believe, on there's a move where we're related to what we're doing, removing CEOs at the local level to regionalize. It's a cost-saving measure. Well, at the end of the day, what we know is that now we've got to change what we do because we got to integrate into another leader's paradigm because they're making the decisions. So the podcast is, you can download it anywhere, Round with Randall, on any platform. We can watch it on YouTube if you are demonic and you think this face is worth watching more often. But we all have to pull together. I'm glad to do whatever I can to help others.
Thank you so much, Randall. And if you haven't had enough of Randall, you can get 3 times the Randall in the Philanthropy Masterminds podcast, because that one's a little longer of an episode than your 20-minute weekly. I'm sure you'll enjoy that set of stories too. And I want to thank both you, Randall, but also everybody here in the audience for being a part of the conversation. We really do appreciate that. I hope you'll join us again next week. We have 2 more sessions coming up, plus a podcast every weekend. So do check it out. You can do all that at DonorSearch.net. We also have a little survey that's going to pop up when you leave today. Please fill that out so we'll know what you want to see and hear for the rest of the year. And once again, I want to thank the folks at DonorSearch for indulging us so I can have great conversations with leaders like Randall. And I want to encourage you to take a look at all the recordings of these conversations over at DonorSearch.net under the resources tab. And while you're there, check out your donors, because without them, we can't do anything we do. Thanks so much, everybody. We'll look forward to seeing you next time. So then, take care.